Namaste. My name is Preity Upala, and I am a global thought leader and a multimedia personality. Welcome to my podcast, The Preity Experience. Join me as I explore some of the most fascinating and crucial issues that affect our world today. I take a unique global perspective on these issues, and the very foundation of my insights is humanity and spirituality. I'm Preity Upala, and welcome to the Preity Experience.
Now, foreign ministers of the Quad, the informal security forum comprising India, the US, Japan and Australia, are expected to hold a much-awaited meeting in Tokyo on the 6th of October with the objective of tightening strategic cooperation and advancing the goal of a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. The meeting is expected to be followed by consultations at senior officials level in November. The meeting will discuss collaboration amongst Quad countries in counter-terrorism, cyber and maritime security, development, finance, humanitarian assistance and disaster response, according to South Bloc officials. The ministers are also expected to discuss practical collaborations in developing advanced technologies, including 5G and 5G plus telecom standards, as well as securing the sea lanes of communications in the Indo-Pacific. The Quad is expected to take steps towards an institutionalized dialogue at the meeting, where Chinese action since the rise of global pandemic from Wuhan will come under a magnifying glass. Given that all the Quad partners have a military supply and logistics sharing agreement with each other, the foreign ministers will also take a decision on a four-nation naval exercise under the rubric of Malabar in the Arabian Sea to signal their commitment for free and open navigation in the Indo-Pacific. To decode this story, we have Ambassador Deepak Vora, former diplomat, joining us live. Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, joins us live as well. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign affairs editor, Hindustan Times, is with us live. And Preity Upala, editor of the Observer California, is joining us on the broadcast as well. Professor Nalapat, you're someone who, of course, has advocated strengthening of this relationship for quite a while. How do you look at this strategic meeting that will be held soon, and what all you believe should be on the agenda?
Well, I just hope it just won't be another meeting in which everybody goes away and possibly some discussions and decisions are taken in private and not shared with the public. The reality is the public in all these countries is very concerned about China. In India, I can tell you that is certainly the case. And while it's okay to say, trust the government, trust the government, trust the government, the reality is that we will certainly trust the government, but we would like to see some evidence that there is now a coordination of important countries to basically, ensure that there is a defense against a threat to all of them. So the point is what is called last mile connectivity. The Quad seems to be hovering without last mile connectivity for a very long time. I hope this is going to be the decisive meeting. And when you have a situation in which 20 Indian soldiers have been lost, in which the Chinese have been aggressive across the spectrum of their borders and very, very clear about what they intend to do with the United States, what they're doing with Japan, with Australia, with India. I mean, if you don't have last mile connectivity now, openly, I don't know when you're going to have it. So I'd like to say, as an ordinary member of the public, I'd like to be reassured that we are now having an alliance to ensure that this situation is dealt with and there is a defense against China and Pakistan. Let me also remind you, the CPEC is de facto a security alliance between Pakistan and China. Because of CPEC, any tension with Pakistan will involve China. Any tension with China will involve Pakistan. The CPEC is actually a de facto alliance with another name. So in this situation, I'd certainly like to see that the dancing about with words and phrases and honeyed language is ended and we go in for some blunt language.
All right. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, what do you believe should be on the agenda for these talks? Do you believe, this meeting is also very crucial at a time when China is being very belligerent, when China is being aggressive, not just in the, vis-a-vis India, Bhutan, and its other neighbors, but also in the South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific region and ocean?
The Quad has, as we all know, is an evolving situation, and it is effectively unlike, let's say, NATO or any of the other major international military or quasi-security alliances. There is no treaty structure, and there is no actual big historical event that has triggered its creation, if you wish. It's been a gradual one, with all of the four members going back and forth, if you wish, on their views on China. And you may remember the original Quad was largely broken or fell apart because of Australia's unwillingness to take on China. Now Australia is remarkably aggressive on China, but America, while it's aggressive in this present administration, we're waiting to see, obviously, in the next, after this election, what the next administration's viewpoint will be. So the game right now, I would argue, is, you may remember that Steve Biegun, the US Deputy Secretary of State, when he had announced that this meeting would be held, he had said that it would be held in New Delhi. Instead, it's being held in Tokyo. And I would argue the main reason it's being held in Tokyo is because there's a new prime minister and a new government in Tokyo. Suga is a bureaucrat. He's a cautious man. He's nothing quite as both confident or necessarily pugilistic as Shinzo Abe was. Even though Abe himself selected him in many ways, he is very dependent of the Nikkei faction of Japanese politics, which represents heavy industry, which is very close or sees China as a very important market. So I would argue one of the key reasons they've decided to hold this meeting in Tokyo, and remember, the foreign ministers will not only meet each other physically, they will all meet the Japanese prime minister, is to make him, if you wish, box him in and ensure that he takes a hard line or repeats the lines of Abe's positions on China. And Japan's earlier commitments to the Quad are essentially set in stone for this government. I don't think Suga has a problem with that policy, but he's still finding his feet. And unusually, for a Japanese prime minister, he does not head a faction within the Liberal Democratic Party. As I said, he was a former cabinet secretary. So this is, in my way, I think, a way to ensure that this key element of the Quad is fixed and set in place. The Americans will obviously want to would like some strong language and positions to come out, especially on perhaps 5G, because of the elections coming up. They would like to get that signaling in place. It's very useful it'll be at least useful for Trump. China is probably the only real foreign policy issue in the US presidential election. We obviously be looking for language and support regarding our present border problems, confrontation with China. And Australia has been in a sort of covert and overt state of confrontation with China, despite having no territorial issues, on a whole host of fronts. To the point that I noticed that Netflix has now launched a series called Secret City, which is solely about Chinese covert operations to destabilize Australia. When Netflix has decided to do that, you know that you have a serious problem.
Okay, let me bring in Ambassador. Before I bring in Ambassador Vohra, Preity Upala, come in here for your comment on, of course, the Quad's role, the Quad's, the fact that it's very relevant right now, the fact that, there's a lot on their plate, and what you believe should be its first priority. Should the first priority be, a new Indo-Pacific treaty, a new agreement? Should, of course, the Quad come out with a strong statement? What do you believe should be their first priority, should be top of their agenda when they meet?
Thank you. Namaste, Uday. Thank you for having me on your show. Pleasure to be here. It's important to note that this meeting, yet once again, is still an informal security forum meeting. So I think they've been informal for so long that I think the first action is really formalize it. I think they need an institutionalized dialogue, definitely a strengthening of the strategic alliance within the Indo-Pacific is the most important item at the moment. It's great that they have on their agenda to talk about things like counterterrorism, but also cyber and maritime security issues. Obviously, I think they're being ambitious. They want to tackle a lot of different topics while they're going to meet. But I think what's going on in the Indo-Pacific is no joke, and also the South China Seas. This affects all the countries. I think it's interesting to note that all 4 of these countries have their own grievances separately, quite independently with China, and they're all looking to get something from it. I think formalizing this to a point, as you mentioned, having some kind of a treaty, whereas, yes, if one gets attacked, then the other 3 are automatically enveloped in that situation. That gives a lot of support, moral, physical, military, emotional, to all the 4 countries, because right now they're very much disjointed. I think India is very much standalone, sadly, in the situation, where if anything did happen, I really think that they're on their own, as they've always been. I think one important thing to note is that this meeting and all of this it's very timely. 5G is an important one. While, the US, but all the other countries also want to make a big deal and really look at this whole global pandemic under a microscope, from how it emerged and its effect on the world at large, and how do we hold China accountable. I think from the US perspective, this is sort of a great situation, because they're having a U-turn of their foreign policy vis-a-vis China. 50 years ago, Nixon had a completely different policy under the tutelage of Henry Kissinger. They were very pro-China at that time. And now you look at Secretary Pompeo, when he speaks quite boldly about the situation, they really do view China as the adversary. And I think that's better for the region and the world at large. But I think talk is fine, but we need to start walking the walk. And I'd like to see some formalization of this entity. I don't know how it's going to manifest, but I think it's high time that something is really put and signed and delivered, because I think all of these countries, they need each other's backs. I don't think China is going to be hunkering down anytime soon. I think things are only going to escalate. And for that, you do need a stronger alliance, especially in the South China Seas and within the Indo-Pacific region.
Okay, well, this meet, of course, expected to take place next week, Ambassador Deepak Vora. What do you believe will come up for discussion? And what do you believe perhaps might not, but you believe should, in your opinion?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to interact with you and with all the other wonderful people on your panel, to learn from them. I couldn't agree more with Professor Madhav Nalapat that the quadrilateral security dialogue, which, as Ms. Upala said, was established several years ago. I think it was in 2007, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan first proposed this idea. Then, of course, the first iteration of Quad, they had this meeting, they had the Malabar exercise and so on. And then it kind of fell apart when Australia, frightened by China, remember, withdrew from Quad and then came back again 3 or 4 years later. The idea initially was a kind of arc of democracy, of Asian democracy, so that there would be some kind of a system that would counter the threat being posed by China. That was the original idea, and now we are seeing it being realized more and more. We are seeing that this idea is coming to fruition. So let me just very quickly mention one thing, and at this point of time, I'd also like to say that I personally am in distress now, because one of my best friends, Ambassador Madhav Chandra, now I've just heard that he passed away because of the Chinese virus. I was very disturbed. He's a very, very fine person, outstanding son of India. Just as the United States made the mobile phone an essential part of our existence, China has made the mask. So it is difficult to imagine the angst, the anger against China. The West is upset because Chinese aggression was hiding in plain sight and they didn't see it. They were salivating over the prospect of selling to China. Remember that old thing the Americans used to say, 1 billion Chinese, if we sell one handkerchief to each Chinese, that's 1 billion handkerchiefs. That was the kind of nonsense that was being talked about. And Henry Kissinger, the fellow we referred to, was encouraging this. The idea was that when Coca-Cola went into China in 1978,
or 79, then through the Chinese taste buds and exposing them to Western luxuries, we would be able to involve them in a global system that was more democratic. Now that did not happen. The developing countries, particularly in Asia and Africa, accepted Chinese money because the world was in a financial crisis in 2008, and then the World Bank and the IMF and the bilateral donors used to impose all kinds of conditionalities, lecture them on good governance, anti-corruption, human rights, all that kind of stuff was being imposed on them. So here comes this white knight in shining armor. He comes in and says, guys, here's my checkbook, take what you want, build whatever project you want, keep a little percentage for yourself and for your family. Now, they also are beginning to feel that they have been cheated. So what we are seeing today across the world is a coalescence of Western anger at themselves for misreading China and the developing world saying, look, this guy was supposed to take on the bullies on the block, but he's become the biggest bully of the lot. And I believe Quad is an answer to this. China's aggression, China's deceit, China's lying has had this unintended repercussion of revitalizing the only organization in the Indo-Pacific, which at the moment is limited to 4 because it's quadrilateral, but it could pentalateral, multilateral, whatever in due course. That's the only organization that will be able to isolate and expose China. And what I expect this time, sir, would be fairly clear statements. Professor Madhav Nalapat, it is not going to be, but nobody's going to pussyfoot it. Now, there's so much of anger at China that I believe we are going to come out with very clear statements. We're not going to say that we hate China, but we are going to say that there should be freedom of navigation, there should be democracy, there should be openness, there should be no threats to other people, etc. It will be couched in diplomatic language, but the message will be clear even to a deaf, dumb, blind person. So it's very, very clear that China's day is over.
Okay, I'm going to have to leave it at that. My thanks to all of you for joining us.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.